Trick may love the kids, but Jay-Z sure as hell doesn't. Welcome back to Wine and Chill. I'm Stephanie, your favorite recovering lawyer, and today, instead of covering a pop culture lawsuit, we are going to discuss Jay-Z's school vouchers and why the community's favorite op is out here again running amok. Alright, so you may have seen the misleading headlines that Jay-Z and Roc Nation are donating $300 million to scholarships for Philadelphia school students. The lie detector came back and that is a lie. Not only are these headlines misleading, they're not actually giving the truth, because the math would never be mathing. How is a man that is allegedly worth $1 billion going to give away nearly a third of his fortune? The past program that Jay-Z, a man from Brooklyn, Marcy Projects to be exact, because he loves to remind people that he is from Marcy Projects, even if he only goes there these days to take pictures in front of said Marcy Projects. Oh, and do interviews with Oprah. Said Brooklyn man who has never lived in Philadelphia has now found himself championing the new PASS program, legislation that would literally take $100 million away from Philly public schools and put them towards school vouchers. He is now the face of what is a conservative right-wing effort to defund public schools. But before we read Jay-Z the Riot Act, let's break down what exactly school vouchers are and why the term school choice, which sounds seemingly innocent on its face, is actually a nefarious effort to destroy our public education system. Let's take it back to a troubling time. The year is 2016. Do y'all remember Betsy DeVos? Betsy DeVos was the Department of Education and was so horrible at her job that parents across the country, teachers unions, teachers in general, young people, oldest daughters, everybody and their mama came together to hate Betsy DeVos. Before she was placed into the role as Secretary of Education, a role that she was not qualified for, Betsy DeVos was a businesswoman with a plan. Now, she didn't become a billionaire simply by being a businesswoman. Like most billionaires, she inherited the money, she married into the money. That money happened to be scammy adjacent. She is married to one of the heirs of the Amway fortune, Amway most notoriously related to MLM pyramid schemes. Yeah. So essentially what Betsy DeVos wanted to do and what she started enacting, something that has been in the pipeline by conservatives for decades, is Betsy DeVos wants to introduce free market economics to public education. Yes, you heard that right. Our education system would be better, according to Betsy DeVos, if we introduce competition. Yeah. Instead of just the taxpayer money and everyone paying their actual taxes and the billionaires paying their fair share, Betsy DeVos wants to privatize schools. So the woman with no educational background started her efforts to defund public education in the state of Michigan. From this Washington Post article in December 8th, 2016, DeVos is a former Republican Party chairwoman in Michigan and chair of the pro-school choice advocacy group, American Federation for Children, a group that is indeed not for the children. And she has been shining a light to members of the movement to privatize public education by working to create programs and pass laws that require the use of public funds to pay for private school tuition in the form of vouchers and similar programs. She has also been a force behind the spread of charter schools in Michigan, most of which have recorded student test scores in reading and math below the state average. Yes, you heard that right. Despite what Roc Nation is trying to do now in their PR fiasco and doubling down, saying they are not taking away money from public schools, they are indeed helping Republicans take money away from public schools. Does anybody read in that office? Don't answer that question. School choice is not about getting a better education to each and every child in this country. It is a right-wing backed business proposition to introduce free market economics into education by using public taxpayer money, and it simultaneously takes funding away from public schools. It also allows rich parents whom are already paying private school education to now receive a subsidy so they can subsidize their personal bills. What's unsurprising about this is billionaires and decamillionaires, these mofos stay stealing people's money, whether it's through tax breaks or simply not paying their fair share. We truly need to come together and do something about these welfare queens. It should always be noted that one of the reasons why you see the right wing pushing school choice is not only to make money out of our education system. Education should be a right to everyone and it should be free. The other half of it is it has always been easier to control an uneducated workforce. If you take all of the money out of public schools, the students that cannot afford to attend a private school will now be placed into schools that have even less funding, even less resources, and larger class size. And in unfortunate circumstances that we are seeing going on throughout Black and Latino neighborhoods across the US, you're seeing massive school closures. Now, to take it a step back into history, school choice is not something that started yesterday. School choice and the idea of school choice started in the 1950s because, and 1, 2, 3, racism. Ding, ding, ding. The answer in America is always racism. To avoid integration, Southern lawmakers, in an effort to get the votes of evangelical rural white Christians, allowed them to open literal segregationist private schools. They made the tuition so low that every white family, no matter if you were extremely poor and lived in poverty, or if you had a modicum of money, could afford to go to the school. But since the schools were private, they did not allow any Black children in the schools. I actually have an entire video dedicated to this and how that ties into the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and you can check that video out here. But I'll play a quick snippet for your edification. So, Brown versus Board of Education most famously desegregated the schools in America. Prior to that, all of the schools were segregated. Black children in the dilapidated, underfunded schools, and white children in the much nicer schools. It should be noted, outside of all of these jarring pictures of white families yelling at young Black children, that most Southern states and most Southern counties refused to integrate for years, decades. It went so far that in Virginia, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, North Carolina, Texas, and South Carolina, they decided they weren't going to do it. They simply were going to create segregation academies. A big reason why they were able to afford these private yet free white-only segregated academies is because they received tax-free funding. Yes, these evangelical churches had 501c3 status, aka everything was tax exempt. They created the schools, and thus they created the schools with the same 501c3 tax exempt status. So between 1954 and 1973-ish on the books, hundreds of segregation academies popped up throughout the United States. Tuition vouchers, however, died in popularity in the 80s and 2010s, but saw a resurgence in 2020 due to the fake culture wars that various Republican lawmakers, including Ron DeSantis, drummed up, stating CRT, critical race theory, a graduate level course taught in graduate schools and as an elective in some colleges, was somehow being pushed to the average 7-year-old. That never occurred. That never happened. It's never happening. And that's why you see all of these angsty, angry parents who really need to get a job, do something productive with themselves, have nothing to do, going now and simply all out attacking Black history. Because CRT has been used as a euphemism to now stifle Black history being taught in schools, any information about LGBTQ plus history, and you know what? Anybody's history who's not a WASP, white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. According to the Washington Post, taxpayer dollars via vouchers are now sending billions of dollars to religious schools. Separation of church and state be damned. Religious schools where the state cannot control what is being taught in the schools, where you probably still have people arguing about creationism versus evolution. That was the culture wars when we were kids, and I just remember thinking, are y'all gonna get it together? What is actually on my pop quiz? I need to know. According to the Washington Post, in most states that have implemented a school voucher system, school vouchers can be used at almost any private schools, but the vast majority of the money is being directed to religious schools, according to a Washington Post examination of the nation's largest voucher programs. Vouchers, government money that covers education for families outside the public schools, vary by state but offer up to $16,000 per student per year, and in many cases fully cover the cost of tuition at private schools. In some schools, a large share of the student body is benefiting from a voucher, meaning a significant portion of the school's funding is coming directly from the government. The same article highlights a lawsuit by more than a dozen counties in Ohio suing the state of Ohio, stating, hey, you have now defunded the public schools so much to allow for this voucher program that we as the public schools are suffering and are unable to teach the children in the way they deserve. The complaint rightfully points out in paragraph 5, the Ohio Department of Education funds Ed Choice program vouchers from the budget appropriation designated for public schools. Because public funds are finite, funding Ed Choice program vouchers out of the foundation funding designated for public school districts inevitably depletes the resources designated by the legislature for educating Ohio's public school students. One of the interesting things, particularly with the past program that Jay-Z and Roc Nation are becoming the faces of, these programs at first never start out with, of course, everyone should receive $16,000 even if you're rich so that way you can subsidize your bills. Instead, the programs take a slippery slope of course, we are helping the indigent that we have made indigent. We are helping the socioeconomically depressed that we have made socioeconomically depressed. And the vouchers are only for them. Just for 6, 8, 9, 12 months, 2 years later, to then introduce the voucher program to everybody and their mama, including the rich that the voucher program is designed for. Politico has documented that these school voucher programs are already subsidizing the rich. In this article, the headline reads, GOP states are embracing vouchers. Wealthy parents are benefiting. Again, what is that man from Brooklyn doing in Philadelphia's business?
She doesn't even go here.
Which brings us to the legislation in question, PASS. PASS was introduced by Senator Judy Ward, who is a Republican in Pennsylvania, to enable students from low-income families currently in underperforming schools to access to private education through school vouchers. According to PBS, the program would provide scholarships to eligible students in kindergarten through 12th grade. If approved, Roc Nation requests $100 million to go towards students who would receive scholarship ranging from $2,500 to $15,000. Students must come from low-income families in the lowest 15% of schools in statewide performance tests. Initial reports stated that Jay-Z was donating $300 million to provide scholarships for students, which is false, unequivocally. PBS said, listen, we don't have time for the foolishness. Stop the foolishness. Stop trying everybody as if the rest of us cannot read. We can, and we do exercise our right to read, unlike, again, a alleged billionaire. Imagine having all that free time, all that access, and all that money, and still choosing just to read the first page of a book. If the legislature approves the measure, the funds would come from taxpayers. President of the American Federation of Teachers in Pennsylvania, Arthur Steinberg, released a statement on X slamming Jay-Z and Pennsylvania billionaire Jeffrey Yass, accusing them of taking funds away from public schools. Yass, a Republican, has donated tens of millions of dollars towards the school choice movement in Philadelphia. Jay-Z's representatives deny the accusations, aka Miss Diaz and them, who we'll get into in a second, and said they are simply offering another solution. Did anybody ask y'all? And how are you denying things that are so easy to look up? It is written into the bill of PASS that $100 million will come from Philadelphia taxpayers. Instead, that money, and if he actually wanted to donate any of his money, should go to the public schools. Imagine doing the wrong thing, getting caught in the lie, doubling down on the lie, and then just being like, these people are going to believe me. So specifically, the PASS program will give $2,500 for students in half-day kindergarten, $5,000 for students in full-day kindergarten through 8th grade, $10,000 for students in the 9th grade through 12th grade, $15,000 for students with special needs. Now, while these numbers sound like a lot of money, if you have kids or know somebody that has kids or are the de facto auntie, uncle, caregiver of kids or the oldest sibling who's, in charge of these things, you know good and well that $5,000 is not covering private school education. $5,000 is barely covering daycare. The average daycare a month in the United States is between $1,000 and $2,000 depending on where you live. So I figured we would look up the cost of education currently in Philadelphia private schools. As you can see here, the average cost of Philadelphia private schools is $46,000 for a high school student. You are hearing that right. $46,000 of tuition. What are these parents going to do with $10K? Who is paying for the other $36,000? And while students might be eligible for additional scholarships, it is highly unlikely that the student is going to qualify for a full scholarship. It should be noted that private schools do not have the same rules as public schools, so once you're in the private school system, the school is under no obligation to ensure that you graduate. So if you pluck your student who you are saying comes from a socioeconomically purposely disenfranchised background, put them into the ritzy school, and then maybe they don't do well, they are at the school's whim on whether or not the school wants to work with them or simply expel them. Which has me questioning, is the goal to not only subsidize private school education for the 1%, but also now to add high school student loan debt to kids and their parents? Sean, did you even read the PASS legislation? I know reading is discouraged in the halls of Roc Nation. Can you come here, please, and tell us your compensation of what the cost is for selling us out to the Aryan Nation? Y'all know I love a good rhyme.
Well, she tried. At least, she...
But really though, how much money did you get? Come meet us outside. We're not gonna jump you. And by we, I mean other people. Me personally, choosing violence is good for the soul. To make matters worse, not only is Jay-Z and his team putting out these false narratives that they are somehow donating $300 million when all they're really doing is gathering together right-wing billionaires and other sources of right-wing money and taxpayer funding, they're actually going in the community to do dine-and-learns. In an economy where the cost of grapes is $10, Jay-Z and Roc Nation are going out into purposely disenfranchised Black communities in Philly to teach the parents about the school voucher program. And if you sit down and listen to Jay-Z's timeshare, you will get a free dinner. The hell? Doesn't this sound a lot like the crypto scam that he was running in Marcy Projects? Where if you sat down and listened to it, you got one fraction of a Bitcoin or Dogecoin or some other coin. Coercing people that are likely to live in a food desert, in a food insecure neighborhood with food, so that way you can likely get compensation from right-wing billionaires, is nefarious work. And just so Roc Nation knows that we can quote them directly, in the words of Dania Diaz, Roc Nation's managing director of philanthropy, who was in charge of overseeing Jay-Z and Roc Nation becoming the face of this initiative, and quote, "We are supporters of the public school system, but numbers don't lie, and the data shows that there must be another avenue for success for the state's most vulnerable students," Diaz said. And you are right, Miss Ma'am. Numbers don't lie, and the numbers clearly state how Black and Latin children fare in these white, homogenous private schools. Perhaps this effort actually isn't for the Black and Latin children. Perhaps it's actually for someone else. More on that later. Now, let's get into who the real moneybags is, because it's not Jay-Z behind this effort of school choice and dismantling the public school system in the state of Pennsylvania. That is a one Jeffrey Yass. Now, how is your name Jeffrey Yass and you're giving nothing? Not even a sparkle, not even some happiness, not even some joy. And during Pride Month at that, trying to take the education away from kids is giving hate crime. As you see here, this is Jeffrey Yass with, the glasses, the what's left of the hair, etc.
The shade of it all.
And while I'm not sure who the white man with the full head of hair standing next to Jay-Z is, doesn't he look like Matthew McConaughey? Curious as to who that is. If you don't know about Jeffrey Yass, don't worry, we're gonna get into his business. Jeffrey Yass is the richest man in Pennsylvania and has a gripe with the Department of Education. He was formerly a professional gambler and then turned into a Wall Street trader. He has long been a major donor to conservative causes across Pennsylvania and likely the nation. Speaking of his donations to conservative right-wing causes, he gave an $8.5 million contribution to Students First, which was made in 2020. That is part of a right-wing PAC. Interestingly enough, according to PBS, that donation was incorrectly marked on campaign finance reports as having gone to the United States Postal Service. I wonder if that was an accident. Interesting accounting. Now, because ProPublica is really out here doing the Lord's work in their ousting of billionaires and decamillionaires who are avoiding taxes, of course, Jeffrey Yass came up. He got his own expose, actually. Meet the billionaire and rising GOP megadonor who's gaming the tax system. And Jay-Z's new business partner / friend. Yeah. It should be noted, according to ProPublica, in their huge tax dive that they did in June 21st, 2022 on Mr. Yass, his average federal income tax rate was just 19%, which is significantly below the average tax rate on Wall Street, but also significantly below the average American tax rate. We are likely paying more in our federal tax rate than the billionaire, and have been. I can say for sure, as a lawyer who worked in tech, at the time, my tax rate is significantly higher than that. How is that I'm proportionally paying more money than the man who actually has the money? And it should be noted, Jeffrey Yass probably doesn't care about the kids one way or another. This is all a business opportunity to these billionaires. By privatizing the school system, they can make money out of schools. Because in late stage capitalism, everything is about running everything into the ground to squeeze the last penny out of you. Similarly to how we now have all these celebrity hair care lines. Where was this 20 years ago? Do we need this now? That is my only question. Personally, the answer is no. But let us continue. Now, What is going on in Pennsylvania is not an isolated incident. In the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, there is an entire section dedicated to the abolishing of the Department of Education. Project 2025 takes it a step further and instead says the quiet part out loud. Not only do they want to abolish the Department of Education, they want to turn this place into a theocracy. Imagine our taxpayer money going to fund the education of the next commander. What? Speaking of which, where is the next season of Handmaid's Tale? That show has gone so far off the rails, but I'm still rooting for my favorite white woman, and that is Janine. Free Janine. She deserved better. How school choice and school vouchers have resurged into the American psyche is because conservative activists saw an opportunity. It is time for the school choice movement to embrace the culture war. The Heritage Foundation's Jay Green and James Paul wrote in 2022. And specifically from Project 2025, here in the mission from a one Lindsay M. Burke, federal education policy should be limited and ultimately the Federal Department of Education should be eliminated. Huh? Wait, what? But this is, the neighborhood's favorite guy, Jay-Z, who's doing it for the people. Yeah, okay. It should also be noted on top of school vouchers, there are also educational savings accounts, ESAs. The same concept, but instead of the schools directly receiving the money in educational savings account, the parent would directly receive the money. Again, where is that money coming from? From taxpayer money that should go to the public schools. Because neither Jay-Z nor the people at Rock Nation actually care about the kids, no one is asking the important question of what happens to the Black and Latin kids you pluck from their socioeconomic status and their public schools and place them and thrust them into private elitist education. By elitist, read that to mean homogenous and very white. Completely different backgrounds than they're used to. New York for decades has tried to champion and try to, prepare students for this life of becoming a burgeoning baby talented 10th. In New York, we have a program called Prep for Prep. And while I will say the reasoning and the beginnings of Prep for Prep are quite noble to help students who are exceptional in their own schools, it falls flat for a myriad of reasons. So Prep for Prep, essentially when students are in a late elementary and a middle school, tested to see if A, you're exceptional, and then B, prepared to see if you can then get sent off to a private boarding school or a private day school in the New York Northeast area. These students exclusively come from purposely impoverished socioeconomic backgrounds and are Black and brown. So think Canarsie, the South Bronx, Flatbush, what's left of Flatbush, etc. So from one of the leaders of Prep for Prep, one of the things we're going to do is telling your kids every which way from Sunday that they can do it. He recalled saying to parents that whatever obstacle remains, racial, socioeconomic, they can overcome them. If the message you're giving to kids is directly contrary to that, it's too much cognitive dissonance for an 11-year-old to be asked to deal with. Prep for Prep largely focuses on individualism. Tell these Black and brown kids that not only are they the best, they are just as good as their white peers, which is also true. However, telling an 11-year-old that as long as they work twice as hard, they too can get half as much is not a good way to raise a kid. Plucking a child and making them the token Negro in a private elitist institution and then telling them that they are not allowed to see systemic issues is a surefire way to cause massive damage. However, it is a guaranteed way to create a new soldier for capitalism. In pushing back on the Prep for Prep program, Nicole Hannah-Jones, the creator of the 1619 Project, was quoted as saying, "They allow us to say if kids really wanted an education, if they wanted to work hard, they could get it. Look at this program. They can apply for this program," she said, and it allows us to sustain all the other inequality and feel okay about it because we are given this small avenue to this small number of kids who wanted it. If inequality is not the fault of the individual, why do we put the burden of overcoming said inequality on the individual? An 11-year-old child at that. During its 40th anniversary celebration in 2019, Prep for Prep hosted a symposium to discuss the need for the program and why the program is still a vital resource to the community. Which it can be argued that if the program, which invests about $65,000 per student for free into these specifically selected children, if it was able to be applied on a mass scale, that it was able to everyone, could definitely benefit people. But that's not how it functions. It should be mentioned that a few months after the symposium in 2019, at Poly Prep Country Day School, an elite private school in New York, a video of two white students wearing blackface and making monkey noises surfaced, causing the black students, many of the students whom had gotten into the school through the Prep for Prep program, to boycott the school, walk out of classes, and otherwise demonstrate as they should. So at the symposium, during the Q&A that followed, a tall young alum wearing a floral shirt and a skeptical look stood up. "I want to know," he began, "whether you feel that there needs to be an ideological shift from a white supremacist, elitist mentality that prep at minimum is participating in, if not encouraging or propagating." The crowd quieted and he went on. "Many of the prep kids he knew and had mentored had a fraught relationship with this prep identity," he said, given prep's relationship with white supremacy norms. Anthony, who is the young man that stated that went through Prep 9 and had been in the prep program since he was in elementary school. Specifically, he went on to work in elite financial institutions and stated that he made more money than his family had ever seen, and he stayed in those jobs to support his mother and his sister, which often happens with Black and Latin children who are now thrust as the first corporate Negro in their family, and now they are essentially paying not only for themselves but for everyone they know. It should be noted that I have a few friends that went through Prep for Prep that I adore, and one of the interesting factors, I would say positive, of the program is because these students, there's so few of them into these elite institutions, they do remain close throughout the remainder of their life. But what is the purpose of forcing young Black and Latin kids to create a self-selected, talented 10th group? And by the time they're 30, they're usually pushing back on that notion, for what it's worth. Anthony then went on to ask, "My real question to Eileen," he explained, was, "how are you going to protect the psychologies of these kids?" Now, with the boom of social media, it doesn't take too long if you peruse around to figure out what happened to your friend who was plucked from your first grade class and put into gifted program, or your friend that went to Prep for Prep, or anybody you knew that was told that they were smarter and therefore put into AP classes at a young age. There's no shortage of short or long videos that discuss what actually happens when you tokenize young Black children and put them in these types of elitist spaces. If you look close enough, you'll see why being a Black face in a white space is less than ideal. The number one excuse you will hear as to why Black and Latin children do not succeed in these white elitist institutions is academic readiness. AKA, you rightfully as the parent, sibling, person in charge, go to the administration and say you have noticed that your student feels XYZ way and XYZ feels racial, that they have experienced aggressions, etc., to which the administration, without missing a beat, is likely to tell you, no, it's because your student came from a public elementary school, they are just not ready for this level of rigor. And that lie couldn't be further from the truth. In his dissertation, Behind the Veil, a study of the experiences of academically talented students of color who attend independent schools in this context is used as private elite institutions. There are also, in New York City, 8 specialized schools, which we'll talk about in a second as well. Jackson Abner, a graduate of New York's prestigious Prep for Prep program and one of New York's most elite high schools, delves into the impact of these elite high schools on 700 Black and Latin students purposely plucked from their underfunded neighborhoods from the South Bronx to Brownsville and dropped into New York's elite institutions with decamillionaires and billionaires. Yes, you heard that right. I have a few friends who were like, oh yeah, it was a few billionaire heiresses in my class. What is the effect of that on a kid who's grown up knowing like, hey, I have to survive, I have to do my best, and here's this person where their life is completely different from mine? The study focuses on 3 areas: racial coping, self-efficacy, sense of belonging, and emotional well-being, as shown in the graph below. So specifically with racial coping and self-efficacy, the study then looks at dual consciousness, school climate, sense of existing in 2 or many worlds, many working identities, code switching, peer interactions, faculty interactions, attention to the bias in curriculum, etc. Because again, they're plucking very smart Black and Latin kids from the environment that they're used to and putting them into completely foreign environment, a foreign environment that is created to be hostile to every single sense of their being. The data suggests that students who attend schools with frequently conflictual racial climate tend to experience greater academic and greater social stress. Students who attend schools that exhibit behavior promoting inclusivity tend to experience less social stress. Additionally, students who experience stereotypes in greater frequency in their schools tend to experience greater levels of academic stress and greater social stress. AKA, whether or not the student does well at the school has nothing to do with academic readiness. It has to do with the school's readiness to have a Black face in a white place. And the impacts of these schools affect not only these students academically, but likely can have damaging effects to how these students go on throughout the rest of their lives. And while these schools do offer a lot of access to the students that get the opportunity to go, that access should always be weighted with what is the school actually teaching the student, and how these schools have huge impacts not only in how the students perform academically, but also how they build self-esteem in the caste system of American white cishet patriarchy. Throughout 2020 and beyond, we've seen grown Black adults, myself included, complain and lament how much the workplace in corporate America is awful, how much the full-on aggressions of your coworker ruins your day. So much so that multiple studies stated that Black employees, over 90% of which loved working from home. Because who's gonna aggress me in my house? Not you. So if we understood that and we all accepted that at face value, why would we then think an 11-year-old, a 13-year-old should be placed in that type of antagonistic environment without those children having the same benefits of age, learning, coping mechanism, and also the ability to advocate for yourself? It not only seems short-sighted to force kids into those types of environments, but it seems cruel. If an environment is not inclusive to someone, the environment should change, not the person. Because without the systemic change, individuals, as evidenced by the study, will experience low self-belonging that shows up both academically and socially, and maybe might scar them for the rest of their life. These disparities are often heightened when you factor in gender and race, with misogyny playing a huge factor into how young Black girls, particularly young Black girls who do not play sports and are shy, are treated in these private institutions. In an interview by Chalkbeat, one such young Black girl, Elizabeth Yard, after graduating with a 3.8 GPA, unweighted, mind you, from one of the 8 highly specialized New York City high schools, those schools you have to test into them, those same schools, the average percentage of Black students is only 3%, even though the percentage of Black students across New York City public schools is 25%. In the article, she detailed how she was unprepared and honestly taken aback by the mistreatment she received in the specialized schools. Between the constant racial slurs from her first week of school to the constant aggressions, Elizabeth stated that maybe in the end, even though she got into the college she wanted, was it really all worth it? I don't personally think it was worth it, she said. I don't think that Black children should always have to face trauma in order to be stronger. The world is already difficult as a Black child. Walking down the street, going anywhere with your friends, always having to be so racially aware at such a young age. If you can have a safe place for 4 years, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, you go there. Not so fun fact, according to the recent UCLA study, New York City public schools are the most segregated schools in the country. In an effort to buy into this racist capitalist system, we often push kids into situations that only on their face may seem like they'll give them advantages. But the reality is we likely scar these same kids for life. We should push for our taxes and donations instead to provide enough money for public schools so each and every student from every socioeconomic background has the access to this type of specialized education. Now, all skinfolk ain't kinfolk, but you already knew that. The fact that as a community, we do not proverbially flog this man is beyond me. This is not the first time Jay-Z has decided that he could make a quick buck in selling the rest of us out. However, I was heartened to see, as evidenced by the comments in Mama Tina's post, that the community is not so easily bamboozled, that unlike the Carters, we do actually read. Julesy and I have a long live stream on Patreon specifically discussing the capitalism of the Carters, but I'm going to include this snippet which outlines how Jay-Z sold Brooklyn out for gentrification. So according to this article from Pitchfork, this is from 2012. Jay-Z owns about 1/5 of 1% of Barclays Center. So he basically owned barely anything of Barclays Center, the first big indoor sports arena to be built in New York City in more than 40 years. So while his actual stake is tiny, the rapper is putting something arguably even more important to him on the line with his involvement in the curvy steel and raptured structure built over Brooklyn's Atlantic Yards, his credibility. By design, he's hardly a silent investor. He's mentioned the arena as well as his stake in its main attraction, the Brooklyn Nets, in several songs since the project began about a decade ago. And according to the New York Times, he's had a hand in everything from the relatively moody lighting of the arena's hallways to the music playing during basketball games to its $500,000 a year VIP lounges. At the same time, he's not just an empty brand solidifier. He grew up 2.5 miles away from the arena in Bed-Stuy Marcy projects. He's clearly got an emotional stake too. I've been on many stages around the world, but nothing feels like tonight, he said yesterday, at the first ever Barclays Center event and the first of 8 sold-out Jay-Z shows to take place there over the rest of the week. So he specifically set himself up to be like, yeah, this is a great thing for everybody. I'm the face of it. So now in 2013, a few years after Barclays Center opened, he sold his stake in Barclays Center so that way he could have a minimal stake in Brooklyn Nets to be like, oh, I'm only selling it because I want a sports team. And then he sold his stake in the Brooklyn Nets too. And he only did, all of that did was speed up gentrification in Brooklyn, but also line his pockets while he could continue to claim somehow, arguably, that he cared about this borough that he really does not care about.
Dirty, dirty business. Capitalism saves nobody.
Saves nobody. It's also the intricate design to be like a black puppet for billionaire developer. I'm like, sir.
You know, that change clothes and go. Look, I was in New York during the business class and the club eras. Yeah, we used to be business casual. And I personally love
Oh, yeah, with the peplum.
Yeah, you know, it was very body positive, Bigfoot positive.
He's not Brooklyn's favorite son, while it will always be Biggie problematic Smalls. And why we should really question anything he does when he says he's for the people, for the culture. Okay. Celebrities now more than ever need we, the 99%, to buy products to prop up their already inflated lifestyles. It's either pushing products on us or cozying up to billionaires like Jeffrey Yass and becoming their face of disgrace. And allowing a billionaire to use your likeness to run whatever nefarious games that they want to run. These celebrities honestly will stop at nothing to fuel their greed. Jay-Z is not only not our kinfolk at this point, he's basically a used car salesman. A used car salesman who still continues to want to cosplay as a liberation leader. A liberation leader who, according to him, also thinks capitalist was a slur created just to besmirch his black capitalist ass.
All these lies that America told us our whole life. And then when we start getting it, they try to lock us out of it. They start inventing words like, capitalist and, things like that.
It's up to us to actively advocate for the kids and for each other. We can volunteer at schools, donate to the teachers' wish list. Most of those wish lists are things that honestly we should be able to provide the teachers anyway. But because of programs like the voucher program and the educational savings account, that money, instead of going to the teachers and them having napkins, glue sticks, glue in general, it's taking that from the teachers, which is why teachers don't have those things and why there are a lack of resources in public schools. There's a plethora of ways that we can collectively help schools, students, and teachers. Because if we leave it up to these black celebrities, they will have all of us up on that auction block.